Okay, guys. Good evening. So, yeah, this will be our last full class, I guess, because you guys are gonna get the final exam later tonight. Okay, so what did did I? Okay, hold on. I think I closed the browser again. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we're gonna do so let me just, we know the dates that everything is due, and so we know that this Wednesday, is the last day to turn in your homework. Okay, and so I will, probably on Thursday morning, I'll post my solutions for all the homeworks, and so you can look at those if you need those for the final, which is due Monday. Okay, and it looks like a lot of you still have, or there's quite a few homeworks that still need to be submitted, and so you guys are all going to turn in your homeworks by Wednesday, yeah? Do you guys need anything for the homework? Because especially the last two, there's still a lot that needs to be submitted. Yeah? Oh, was no question. Okay, so before we do the review for the final, any questions on the homework assignments? You guys are all good to turn them in by Wednesday? Okay, great. So just let me know. I mean, well, you guys are good. Okay. So if there's any questions, just send me an email. Okay. So let's look at the practice. Let's go to the final exam section on Blackboard. Oh, sorry. Let's go to the study guide. That's where the exam is, the practice one. I haven't made the final yet because I haven't passed it out yet. So let's go to the study guides, which are updated today. Okay, and if you scroll down, you'll see the last thing which we'll need for today, and you can use to study for your exam is the practice exam for the final, which I prepared and posted today. So you got the practice exam and my solutions, and we'll go through all of that today, which will be a review. And then the final that I'll post after tonight's session will be similar to the one we do as practice. Okay, so this is the practice one, and we'll just scroll through it, and then we'll do all the problems together with my solutions. And so you'll have 5 questions. So there'll be one kind of for each of these types. Okay, so one where you have to convert nominal to real GDP using an index. So we did that in chapter 10 or 11. Okay, number 2 will be some economic growth measures where you get some growth rates and also some GDP per capita measures. Okay, then there'll be one, probably number 3, where you have to graph and find the equilibrium for aggregate demand and aggregate supply, and then do a few shifts, and then graph and state the new equilibriums after the shifts. Okay, so we did something like that in maybe chapter 13. Okay, and the last 2 will be on the big types of policies. So you're going to have one on the spending multiplier and fiscal policy, where you had to determine, based on the multiplier, the appropriate government spending change and the tax change, which would give you the desired outcome. So we did a bunch of those, and I think we did 2 of those in class, and you have 2 for your homework for chapter 13, so you should have some good practice with that. And I'll post my solutions for those other ones on Thursday. Okay, and the last one will be on the most recent stuff we've done on the money and banking section, in particular monetary policy. Okay, so you'll have the first part will be on kind of the money multiplier, where you had to determine how much new money is created with checkable deposits. Okay, and then I added one little section at the end of this one and your final, where you just get a little, you don't really have to do much here except for just explain the analysis. And so I wanted to put something that related to applying the monetary policy, or one of the policies, in a real-world situation. And so all you have to do is explain how whatever policy I put here is going to work like one of the monetary policies that we explained. So it's going to somehow act as like a expansionary monetary policy by this tool that the Fed used to get out of some specific crisis. So I have one in the practice final about what the Fed did differently during the financial crisis, 2007 and 2009. Then I put one in your final, which is what the Fed just did about a week or so ago that was different, but the way you explain it is similar to what we did in class. Okay, so I'm not looking for anything crazy here. Just I wanted you guys to see how you can apply the analysis to something that's going on in the current economy. Okay, so let's go through this practice exam, and then when you guys are so comfortable with that, we can post your final, which is due next Monday. Okay. Let's open up the practice with the solutions under the practice exam for the final, spring 2020. Okay, here we go. So these are on Blackboard, but let's go through these. So this will be pretty much a review for the final exam. Okay, so the exam I just showed you guys, here are my solutions. So let's get through here. All right, number one, so let's use the price index to calculate real GDP. Okay, so here, assume a single good economy where the only production good is smartphones. And let's refer to the table below. For the measurement year, the corresponding output, and the nominal prices. Okay, and then you're going to use a base year of 2010. And all you have to do is determine the price index for each year based on 2010 being the base year. Then nominal GDP, so the prices are being the GDP for the actual year, and then real GDP in 2010 prices for each of the three GDPs. Okay, so your exam looked like this before the solutions, where you just had the years, the quantities, the prices, and you have to just determine, basically part A is the price indexes, or indices, part B is the nominal GDP, and part C is the real GDP. So this is number one, and let's look at this one. Okay, so you have 3 years of smartphone production for this. This is the only good in this simplified model, where in 2010, there's 100 produced at $200 a piece. In 2015, there's 500 produced at $500 a piece, and then in 2020, there's 1,000 produced at $1,000 a piece. Okay, so this is obviously a simplified example, but it gives you a good idea of the price of smartphones. The price of smartphones obviously went up over the last 10 years or so, and the number that were bought also went up. So both of those things occurred. It wasn't this simple, but this is the example. All right, so the first thing you have to do is make a price index, and all you have to do here is you want to make the base year is going to come out to 1, so you know you did it right, and all you have to do in part A for the price indices is divide all of the prices by the base year price. Okay, so because the base year is 2010, divide all the prices by 200. Okay, and that will give you your index for each year. Okay, so we know the base year is the first one, 2010. So 200 divided by 200 is obviously 1, so the base year should be 1.
I'm sorry, where did you get the other 200? So the one of the 200 is the price, and the other one?
Oh, okay. So you're dividing all the prices by the base year price, but you have to know that the base year price is 200. Okay, so all the prices will be divided by 200, even that one, because that's the base year. Okay, so you divide all the prices, 200, 500, and 1,000. Divide them all by 200, because 200 is the base year price. And that way, you know that your base year is going to come out to a price index of 1. Okay, does that make sense? You're just dividing all of the prices by the base year price, including the base year price. So you should get that whatever the base year is, it's that price divided by that.
Yeah? Can you repeat it one more time? One more time, please.
Okay, so we're developing a price index, okay? And the price index is the nominal price divided by the base year price. Okay, and so that means that you divide all the nominal prices by the base year price. Now, the only one that's the same is the nominal price is the base year, which is 200. So the nominal price, 200, divided by the base year price, 200, is 1. So I'll write the equation here in the chat. Okay, price index is the nominal price divided by the base year price. Okay, okay, you got it? You sure? Okay. Okay, and you'll know you did it correctly if your base year comes out to 1 because the nominal price and the base year price are the same. Now the other ones are going to be different because those are not the base year. So here, the nominal price 500 divided by the base year price of 200 gives us a price index of 2.5. All right, and then the third one, 2020, the nominal price of 1,000 divided by the base year price of 200 is 5. All right, so those are our price indexes for each year. Okay, then nominal GDP is just the GDP for that current year, so it's just output times price or price times quantity. Okay, so we got part A, and part B is the nominal GDP, which is because it's only one good, it's how much was produced times the price that good was valued at. So for the first year, it's just 100 times 200, all right, to stick with the specific year. Okay, so nominal GDP for this year is 100 times 200, which is 20,000. Okay, so that's the nominal GDP for year 2010 and 2010 prices. Now, nominal GDP for 2015 is going to be that year's price times that year's output, which is just 500 times 500. All right, so 500 times 500 is 250,000. Okay, so that's the nominal GDP for 2015. And in 2020, we produced 1,000 of them at $1,000 each. And so that times that will give us the nominal GDP for 2020. So 1,000 times 1,000 is a million. Okay, so we see how to get the nominal GDP. It's the current year's price times the current year's output. Okay, and then the real GDP, you calculate this, so divide the nominal GDP by the price index for that year. So I'll write that here in the chat, but that's all we did here. Alright, so real GDP is just nominal GDP divided by that year's price index. Okay, then that'll convert them all into the base year price, and in this case, that's 2010. So they're all going to be real GDP in 2010 prices. Okay, so nominal GDP, and then we know that the the base year, the nominal GDP and the real GDP should be the same because you're using the same prices for both columns. Okay, so just applying the analysis, the nominal GDP 20,000 divided by that year's index of 1. So obviously it's 20,000 divided by 1 is 20,000. Okay, so you should always check that your nominal GDP and real GDP are identical for the base year, so they're both 20,000 because you're using the same price in both situations. Okay, if we applied the same formula to real GDP for 2015, and take the nominal GDP 250,000 divided by that year's price index of 2.5. Alright, so 250,000 divided by 2.5 comes out to a nice 100,000. Okay, and the last one, take that year's nominal GDP, a million, divided by that year's price index of 5, and a million divided by 5 gives us 200,000. Okay, so the price index is the nominal price divided by the base year price. Nominal GDP is just nominal quantity times nominal price, and real GDP is nominal GDP divided by that year's price index. Okay, so questions on this one, and note that so the example we did here, the base year price was the smallest, so you're pretty much let me write this, but we're deflating the price. Okay, so here we deflated the price, so this would, and the reason why I say this is because if you notice the nominal GDP, so in nominal terms it was 250,000, but when you factor in inflation, it only comes out to 100,000, so you have to deflate it or bring it down to 2010 prices. Okay, and I know that the one, when you see the final exam, there's one just like this, but I'm pretty sure I had you inflate the price. It's the same thing, except the base year is higher because the price went down, so you would inflate the price. But it's the same exact thing. You stick with the base year, and you do the same exact process, but just note that when you do this on the final, your real GDPs will be bigger than the nominals, where here they were less than. So it only has to do with which you pick as the base year, but you do the same exact process. Okay, and so again, it's the same exact thing. The only difference is the base year was a higher value, it's a higher value on the final, and here it's a lower value. So you do the same exact process. And so I just want you to make sure that you do the same thing, but it depends on what you pick for the base year. Okay, does that make sense what I said? Just do the same process, but if the base year is lower, you deflate the price, and if the base year is higher, you inflate the price. Okay, great. So that way you can do it both ways. And so the point is, it doesn't matter which year you pick as your base year. The only thing that matters is you put them all in the same year. So picking a different base year doesn't make a difference for comparison. What does matter is that they're all in the same year's base year terms. Okay, so we're good on that. Let's move on to number 2. Okay, so if you have any other questions as we keep going, let me know and I can go back, because this is the only thing we're doing tonight is going through the whole review session. Okay, so number 2 is on economic growth, and there's a little calculation of per capita terms. So let's suppose real GDP in the U.S. was 18,000 billion in 2018 and 19,000 billion in 2019. All right, so don't worry about the big numbers. These are pretty close to what actually the GDP is, so I try to keep it somewhat relevant to the actual GDP. So the current GDP is something like this. It's like between 18,000 and 19,000 billion. So this is the actual numbers that they report. So just don't worry about the billions. Just work with the numbers. Okay, so assume that the population in the U.S. was 0.32 billion in 2018 and 0.32 billion also in 2019. And so I put them in decimal terms to make the calculations easier for you. And so that way you just divide this by this. For per capita, and that way the billions cancel out and it comes out to a nice even number. So don't worry about the weird numbers. It makes it easier for the calculation when I put the population in decimal billions, so that way you don't have to make any conversions. Okay, you'll see what I mean here. So, part A. What was the growth rate of real GDP from 2018? Okay. All right. So what was the growth rate of real GDP from 2018 and 2019? So remember, the growth rate is just the change over the original. And so always put the newer value here. All right. So the change going from 2018 and 2019 just looks like this, where your real GDP 2019 minus real GDP 2018 divided by the real GDP 2018 is going to give you your percent change or decimal change, and then you multiply it by 100 to get percent. And so if you plug in the numbers from this one, 19,000 for 2019 minus 18,000 for 2018 divided by 18,000 gives us about 0.0556. All right, and if you just put that in decimal terms, just multiply by 100 to make it easier, you get something like 5.56%. So that's the percent increase or the growth rate of real GDP from 2018 to 2019. Okay, so next part B, and again, stop me if you need any more clarification. So calculate GDP per capita first in both 2018 and 2019. And I put a little note here saying your GDP per capita answers should be whole numbers in the thousands. All right, so that means just leave the numbers how they are and do the division. Okay, so we know GDP per capita is simply GDP divided by population in that year. Okay, so GDP 2018 divided by population 2018 will give us the GDP per capita. So just how much GDP there was per person. So GDP in 2018 was 18,000 billion. In population in 2018 was an estimated 0.32 billion. Okay, and this should come out nicely to exactly 56,250. So if you divide this by this, okay, the billions cancel out, and 18,000 divided by 0.32 is a nice even 56,250 per person. Okay, so again, don't try to multiply this out in billions. Just leave it as it is, and it'll make things a lot easier. All right, so then do the same for 2019, GDP 2019 divided by population 2019. You get 19,000 billion, and divided by 0.32 billion. Okay, and the billions cancel out, and this comes out to a nice even 59,375 per person. So this is the GDP per capita in 2019. Okay, then finally, what was the growth rate of real GDP per capita from 2018 to 2019? And so just do the same percent change with the per capita numbers. All right, so real GDP per capita 2019 minus real GDP per capita 2018 divided by real GDP per capita 2018. So that would give us the percent increase growing from 2018 to 2019. And then just plug in our numbers. So we get the GDP per capita 2019 is 59,375, and then minus for 2018 56,250 divided by 56,250, and that gives us 0.0556, which is 5.56%. Okay, so that's the growth rate of real GDP per capita. If you notice, in this example, the two growth rates were identical, and that's correct. So how come we have that result? Okay, so if you notice, I assume the population didn't increase. And so if the population doesn't increase, then the growth rate is not going to change because you have the same growth rate if the population is the same. Right? So the per capita numbers were different, but if the population doesn't change, then your growth rate for per capita versus real GDP is going to be the same if there's no population growth. And the only reason I did that here is because I was trying to find numbers that came out even to divide by. The population does grow on your final exam that you're going to do later, and so do the same thing, but there will be population growth, and the only reason I kept them both at 0.32 is because I tried like 100 of the decimals and they came coming out with like a million decimals, and so I just stuck with that one because for some reason they both get divided by 0.32 and it comes out nice. Okay, so questions on this one? Do you do the growth rates, the per capita metric, or the growth rate in per capita terms? Okay, everyone's good so far? We're following along to... Okay. All right, well, again, stop me if you need any further explanation, but it seems like you guys are getting this pretty good, so you should have no problems on the final. All right, nothing's as hard as the gains from trade problem, so don't have to worry about that. Okay, and so number 3 is on the aggregate demand and aggregate supply, a little example. Okay, so this one is just kind of shifting the curves around, but it's kind of fun. So let's suppose that the AD and AS schedules for a hypothetical economy are shown in the table. So we got real GDP in billions demanded. We got the price level, which is an index, and then we got real GDP supply. So this is aggregate demand. This is aggregate supply, and you can clearly, or you should know that when the price level goes down, demand goes up, and when the price level goes down, supply goes down. So just like you should expect, there's a negative relationship between aggregate demand and price level, and there's a positive relationship between aggregate supply and the price level. So this one will be upward sloping. This one will be downward sloping. All right. Part A is what is the equilibrium price level and the equilibrium level of real output in this hypothetical economy. And so state that, and then illustrate this graphically with the ADAS model. All right. So I did this in Excel, so it's easier to visualize electronically. So you're welcome to use my Excel file as a template if you want to do it in Excel. Or if it's easier, you can just draw it by hand. So whatever is easier for you for this one, you can just illustrate it on a piece of paper, on graph paper or whatever, or you can use Excel. Whatever you want to do is fine with me. Okay, so I posted my Excel file here. If you want to look at that, it's right this one. All right, so I just put in numbers and then made graphs with Excel for the AS and AD curves. So you can do it like that if you want, and you can see that template. So let's go back to the solution. So can you explain where you got the numbers for the X and Y axes? Sure. Okay, so the X, you mean just in general or with Excel? So,
sorry, I guess what I was referring to is x-axis is the amount of real GDP, and then the y-axis, that's the amount of real GDP demanded in billions? Or no, that's...
Oh, so the y-axis is always the price level, and then the x-axis is always the GDP. All right, so this is always going to be priced on the y-axis, and the x-axis is always going to be the GDP in billions. So you get, then you get a different relationship when you look at AS and AB. So it's just like a supply and demand where the price goes here and quantity goes here, right? And then you have different curves for supply and demand. So what goes on the y-axis? So if you do on a piece of paper, just put this as the y-axis, the price level, and then the real GDP is going to be the x-axis. Then if you do it in Excel, you have to graph, you have to have it choose separately the two series. So you want to show aggregate demand, which is GDP, as a relationship with GDP, with aggregate demand and price. And you also want to show separately how the AS curve behaves with price. So this is one series with real GDP demanded in price, and then a second series or a second curve is the real GDP supplied in price. So they're two separate curves. Okay, so if you're going to do it in Excel, you can use my template, but you have to graph them. You have to have it choose them separately. All right, so when you make your graph, you can do like these two. Okay, and then you have to add a series for the other curve. Or if you're just doing it on graph paper, the price level always goes on the y-axis, and the real GDP in billions always goes on the x. Okay, did I answer your question, Aaron? Okay, you're welcome. Okay, and then all right, so let's graph this curve. Okay, so you're given at each corresponding price, so this is like a point, just plot, this is like point A. For the demand curve, this is like point B, so there's 5 points, 5 data points per curve, and just connect the dots, there should be straight lines. All right, so for demand we have 180 and 100, we have 200 and 160, and all these are the points for the demand curve, and then the supply curve, you have 5 separate points. And you'll notice there's only one point in which they're both equal, which is going to be the equilibrium. So I plot all the points in Excel. You can do it in Excel or by hand. So we got for demand, we got 180 and 100. We got 160 and 200. We got 300 and 140. We got 120 and 100, and we got 100 and 500. So I just plot the points and connect the dots and do the same for the supply curve. All right, so 100 and 300. 100 and 100, 120 and 200, 140 and 300, 160 and 400, and then 160 and 500. So you just draw the two curves, and you can see by the chart and the graph that at price level 140, both supply and demand are both 300, so that is our initial equilibrium for part A, where we have the equilibrium price level is 140, and the equilibrium level of real output is 300. Okay, and if we got that, then we're going to shift something or have an increase in one of the curves for part B, which is going to change things. So let's suppose that buyers desire to purchase 200 billion of extra real output at each price level. And so what's the new equilibrium price level and level of real output? So illustrate this scenario with the ADAS model. So you basically, they're going to be linear curves, which makes them easier to draw and graph. So this is equivalent to a increase or rightward shift of the AD curve of 200 billion. So it just shifts out by 200. Okay, so nothing happened to the prices or the supply, but all of these shifted out by plus 200. Okay, so just all these numbers up here have been added, got a plus 200. All right, so 100 plus 200 is 300. 200 plus 200 is 400. 300 plus 200 is 500. 400 plus 200 is 600, and 500 plus 200 is 700. So all these numbers have been just increased by plus 200. Okay, and you can see the curve is shifted up from basically this point and then over to the right. And so if you look at the new chart, you can see at this higher aggregate demand curve, with these levels, there's a new equilibrium, which is at price level 160, and that's the point now when supply and demand are equal. So we get the new equilibrium price level of 160, sorry, and the new equilibrium level of real output at 400. Okay, and then part C, you're probably going to have a shift in the supply curve. So in addition to part B, let's suppose that the equilibrium amount of real GDP supplied increases by 200 billion at each price level. So now the supply curve shifts out by 200. Okay, so now after you do the shift, what's the new price and output? And show this in the new graph for part C. Okay, so now everything is the same except for the price, the supply, exit supply column changed. So all these numbers up here get a plus 200. So 500 plus 200 is 700. 400 plus 200 is 600. And then 300 plus 200 is 500. 200 plus 200 is 400. And then 100 plus 200 is 300. So this curve got a plus 200, and the supply curve now shifts out in addition to what happened in part C. Okay, so this shows the supply curve shifting out, and if you look at the chart and the new crossing point, our new equilibrium price over here is now 140. Okay, so it's back to what it was to start with, but we have more output at 500. So the new price level equilibrium is right there, 140, and the new real GDP output, the new equilibrium level of real output is 500. Okay, so because both curves shift out by the same amount, we get to the original price that we had before, but there's an increased amount of both, and so we have more GDP in equilibrium because both the curves shifted out by plus 200. All right, so you start with this one, graph it, find the equilibrium, then shift out the demand curve and find the new equilibrium. All right, and then shift the supply curve and find the new equilibrium here. So part A on your exam is going to be graph it and find the equilibrium. Part B, the demand curve is going to shift up or down. And then part C, the supply curve is going to shift up or down. Okay, and again, doing it in Excel is optional. If you think it's whichever way you want to do this, as long as you answer the question, is fine with me. So any way of graphing the curves, whether it's graphing paper or Excel or just whatever you do with your graphs, works for this problem. Okay, so any questions on number 3, doing the AS and AD curves? All right, so let's move on to number 4, which is on the spending multiplier and fiscal policy. And so this one's right here with my solutions. I'm going to grab some more coffee real quick and give me like 30 seconds and we'll do number 4. Okay, so let's move on to question number 4 on the practice exam. Okay, so the spending multiplier and fiscal policy, let's assume that a hypothetical economy with an MPC, which is a marginal propensity to consume, so this is how much they consume more on the margin, so they consume basically 60% of any new income. Okay, so MPC is 0.6, and this economy is in a recession. Okay, so we did a bunch of these in the chapter 13, and there were some homework problems that you did for this one as well, or going to do by Wednesday. And this is similar, except we have a different MPC and a different goal. So part A is by how much would government spending have to rise to shift the aggregate demand curve rightward by 150 billion. Okay, and so usually the targets that we're trying to get to, I try to make the math come out nice, so it should come out to something reasonable when you give the calculation. So there's a reason why I chose 150, because the math comes out pretty nice. Okay, so remember this one, we have to get the multiplier, and the general formula for that is 1 over 1 minus the MPC. Alright, so you guys remember this one from chapter 13, and then just plug in the MPC that's given of 1.6. So 1 over 1 minus 0.6 is the same as 1 over 1 divided by 0.4. Okay, and 1 divided by 0.4 gives us a multiplier of 2.5. All right, so this is what the spending categories are multiplied by to determine the final effect on GDP or aggregate demand. Okay, so that's a multiplier, 2.5. Let's use that to answer the question to get to 150. Okay, the general equation we did for this was the change in government spending times the multiplier has to equal the desired target for change in aggregate demand. Okay, so that's the same, but let's plug in what we want to plug in our multiplier and our target. Okay, so we're trying to find the change in government spending. We know we have a multiplier of 2.5, and the goal, we want to shift the AD curve rightward by 150, so let's put in our target of 150. Okay, and then all you have to do here is divide 150 by 2.5. All right, and that gives us delta G of exactly 60. Okay, so what we're saying here is government spending would have to rise by 60 billion to shift the aggregate demand curve rightward by 150 billion. So given the current multiplier, that's what that's how we get to that result. Okay, then part B is the taxes. So how large a tax cut would be needed to achieve the same increase in aggregate demand? So the only difference in this general equation is we throw in the MPC. Right there, and you have the general equation, so you can just use that on your exam. And the reason why it's multiplied by the MPC is because new money from tax cuts increases the consumption spending portion, but because we only consume 60% of new income, then that means that any new income from taxes, only 60% of it goes into the economy, and the other 40% is saved. But we can only count that 60% that effectively helps the economy. So just put in the MPC because this tax cut is only 60% effective, or not, only 60% of it goes into the economy, so you have to reflect that with this MPC. Okay, so here's the general form. The change in taxes times the multiplier times the MPC equals the target of aggregate demand. And so let's plug in what we already have. The multiplier is 2.5, the MPC is 0.6, and our target is 150. And if you multiply 2.5 times 0.6, that gives you a nice even 1.5 here. And that's going to be equal to 150. And if you divide 150 by 1.5, that gives you a nice even change in taxes of 100. Okay, so what this means is a tax cut of 100 billion would be needed to achieve the same increase in aggregate demand of 150 billion. So you can either, so far, increase government spending by 60 billion or cut taxes by 100 billion. Both would give you this desired outcome of the 150. Okay, so we're good on this so far before we do the double plan that has both taxes and government spending. So Part C is the combination plan. Okay, so determine one possible combination of government spending increases and tax decreases that would accomplish the same goal. All right, and so you're doing a combination plan here, which has both policy measures, and your total effect has to come out to the 150. So you're going to do any portion you want with government spending and the rest of it with taxes, and try to pick a number that comes out evenly for the two measures. A good way, you can always start with just doing it do it in half. Okay, so if 150 divided by 2 is, so you can do half of it, 75 with government spending, and the other 75 with taxes, and see if that works out nicely. If not, you can always move some numbers around, but the total effect has to come out to 150. Okay, so the change in government spending times the multiplier has to equal the change in aggregate demand, and the same for the tax portion, with the change in taxes times the multiplier. Times the MPC has to equal the change in aggregate demand, and these two combined have to total to 150. Okay, so you can see that I chose 75 here for government spending, and the other 75 for the taxes. And the reason I did that is because, number one, it's just split down the middle, and number two, I know that both the numbers come out in nice, even numbers. And so it's not always going to be the case, but you can try to make it easy on yourself and pick numbers that are divisible by the multiplier. Okay, so change in government spending times 2.5, the same multiplier, is going to equal 75. And we'll do the rest with taxes, which means the change in taxes times 2.5 times 0.6 has to equal the other 75. So these two plans together will total 150. All right, so for government spending, the change in government spending is 75 divided by 2.5. And for taxes, the change in taxes times 1.5 is going to equal to 75. So for government spending, 75 divided by 2.5 is exactly 30. Okay, and for taxes, 75 divided by 1.5 is exactly 50. So change in tax cut down by 50. Okay, and so this is what this result means. One possible combination that would accomplish the same goal is to increase government spending by 30 billion and also cut taxes by 50 billion. And so you can see I put this in here to make sure it comes out, where the 30 for government spending times the multiplier of 2.5 plus the rest, which is the 50 for tax cuts times the tax multiplier of 1.5 gives us the total together of 150, which is exactly what we're trying to accomplish. Okay, so we've done a lot of practice on this one, but I know that maybe especially part C can be a little tricky. So questions on this one? Okay, well just let me know if you have questions, and just stick with the general formulas. I think you guys have got it, but for part C, make sure your combined effect comes out to the goal of whatever it is. All right, so we'll move on to the last one, which is the money multiplier and monetary policy. But if there's anything else we need to go back on, let me know. Okay, so number 5 is the monetary multiplier and monetary policy. So first we'll do a little analysis of the money multiplier and the new checkable deposit creation. And then I added a little thing, like the last part is just explain how this specific situation from the Fed monetary policy would affect the economy. Okay, so here we go. Tony Cicano found $10,000 and deposited it into the checking account at Chase Bank. So let's answer the following questions in response to this new $10,000 in checkable deposits, and let's assume the reserve ratio is 10%. Okay, so what part A is going to be what is the maximum amount of new loans that Chase Bank can make? So what are the excess reserves? All right, and so remember, excess is what they can lend out in excess of what they have to keep on reserve. So if they have to keep 10% of reserve, that means they can lend out the other 90%, right? So 90%, 0.9 times 10,000 is 9,000. So the excess reserves, 90% of 10,000 is 9,000, and the other 1,000 they have to keep on reserve. All right, then what is the size of the monetary multiplier? And so we know the monetary multiplier, little m, is just 1 divided by the reserve ratio. Okay, so that formula is standard. So 1 divided by the reserve ratio of 10% is 1 divided by 0.1, or 10% in decimal terms. So 1 divided by 0.1 gives us a multiplier of exactly 10. Okay, then you can calculate how much money can possibly be created at the max with these excess reserves and this multiplier, which is just multiply the two together. So calculate maximum checkable deposit creation D, and so that's just excess reserves times the multiplier, right? So whatever you have in excess times the total amount that you can create with the multiplied effect, so 9,000 in excess reserves times a multiplier of 10 gives us a maximum potential of creating money of 90,000. All right, and then part D is let's answer the questions A, B, C. So the three again on the assumption that the reserve ratio is 12.5% now. So the reserve ratio went up, which means the multiplier should go down because another 2.5% has to be kept on reserve now. So there's less money that can be lent out, and a little bit more that has to be kept on reserve. So your multiplier should be lower, and your deposit creation should be lower as well. Okay, so excess reserve, sorry for the decimal, but if you have to keep the excess reserves are what's in excess of what is kept on reserve. So 100% minus 12.5% basically is 87.5%. Okay, so the remainder is 87.5%. Okay, so if you have to keep 12.5% of reserve, you could lend out the other 87.5%. So in decimal terms, that's just 0.875. Okay, so 87.5% of 10,000, or just 0.875 times 10,000 is excess reserves of 8,750. So that's the excess amount you can lend out, with the other 12.5% having, you can't lend that out because that's required reserves. Okay, then the multiplier is 1 divided by the reserve ratio. So 1 divided by 12.5%, which is in decimal terms 0.125. So 1 divided by 0.125 is exactly 8. So you get a nice even multiplier of 8. And then the amount of new money you can create is just excess reserves times the multiplier. That's your potential. So 8,750 excess reserves times a multiplier of 8 gives you a nice even possible creation of $70,000. Okay, so we did this one in chapter 14, and I think there's a homework one for this one as well. But you'll have one of these on your final exam. Any questions on? There's one more part, but any questions on this part? How you do the multiplier stuff and the new deposit creation? Okay, well, let me know if you do. Hopefully we're still following along here. Okay, so the last part, part E, I just want to throw in one part of this, the practice exam and the final exam, which related to a current or a real world monetary policy. And so I put this in here for this one for the financial crisis, and I'll show you what I put in for yours, which is something the Fed did now. And I'm not looking for much here. You can basically just use my argument and change the words around, but I just want you guys to see or hopefully understand how things that are happening right now, you can use the monetary policy analysis and visualize or explain how that's going to affect the economy, right? So it's kind of interesting. Yeah, so quick question. This session is being recorded, correct? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we're being recorded, so I'll put this on YouTube. Okay, so just in case you fall asleep or something, you can listen to it later. Okay, you're welcome. All right, so the last part, part E, is here we go. So one little piece on a current or a specific monetary policy action. So part E, during the 2007-2009 recession, in addition to conventional open market operations, the Federal Reserve announced that it would buy mortgage-backed securities as a monetary policy tool. All right, so you can see the web link below for the announcement. And so all you have to do is briefly explain the cause-effect chain from the specific expansionary monetary policy, which in this case is the Fed buying the mortgage-backed securities, and how it boosted real GDP in the U.S. economy. So if you click on this little web link, you can just see that this is the announcement where the Fed was doing that. Okay, so this is from 2008. So this was a big deal back then because the crisis at the time was caused by the failure of the housing market and the mortgage-backed securities, which were an unwanted asset. And so the Fed did a big part in buying an asset that a lot of people didn't want because it was risky, but it really helped the housing sector and the businesses or banks that had those assets because the Fed was willing to buy those and get money in the pockets of the banks and investors who needed it, and the Fed would just hold the asset. Okay, so here's what happened. I just flipped the equation here so you see that all the monetary policy essentially affects private investment. Okay, and then when private investment goes up, that is equivalent to an increase or a rightward shift in the aggregate demand curve. So GDP goes up when private investment is stimulated. All right, so this should be similar to what you did in the chapter 15 homework, where you just explain the policies. And you don't have to do any like research here. You can just explain however I explained it, or just apply it to whatever you get for your exam. So the Fed buying mortgage-backed securities. This is what happened, or what was supposed to happen. So buying MBSs or mortgage-backed securities is essentially a form of quantitative easing, so it's something unconventional. So here the Fed bought MBSs from banks and the public, and this put money in the banking sector because the Fed is holding the financial asset, which is, in this case, the mortgage-backed security, as collateral, and the banks get the inflow of money from the Fed, which gets infused back into the economy via lending. So the Fed buys the assets, the mortgage-backed securities, and the banks that hold the assets get cash that they can lend out and try to stop the collapse in the financial sector. Okay, so this really helped those big banks. So note that, especially during the financial crisis, the mortgage-backed security was a riskier asset because mortgages weren't being paid than the Fed would typically want to have. But given the nature of the crisis and historically low interest rates, the Fed has turned to more creative monetary policy tools, some forms of quantitative easing. And in this case, they purchased something that would help the specific problem, the housing market. So here's the cause-effect chain that I explained. So the Fed basically increased bank reserves, which big banks desperately needed liquid assets because people were failing on, or their mortgage-backed securities were not paying off, and they were not, these assets were essentially getting worth nothing. So the Fed increased bank reserves by buying mortgage-backed securities. Okay, so as a result, banks could make more loans to the private sector at lower interest rates. Okay, and so the prime interest rate essentially fell. And so note that typically, or not typically, but in standard monetary policy, the Fed wants to target the federal funds rate. But if the federal funds rate is essentially zero, then they have to do things that affect other aspects, such as the prime interest rate. So that was the idea here. So this, because the private sector got more borrowing, and they spent more in businesses, this by definition had to boost private investment, which the rest of this is familiar, led to a rightward shift, expansionary shift of the 80 curve, and then in theory the economy moved to a newer, higher equilibrium level of real GDP. So this is like the AD curve shifting out, and we get a new, higher equilibrium GDP as a result of the new investment spending. Okay, so your answer doesn't have to be that wordy. I just wanted to hopefully see how you can use a specific policy tool that the Fed did during that crisis, and then I have one that they're doing now, and you can hopefully see how that gets into the economy in a certain way and helps one of the sectors that it's trying to help, because sometimes when interest rates are super low, then pushing down the federal funds rate doesn't do much because it's already pretty much zero. And that's the case now, as it was during the financial crisis. Okay, so does that make sense? The little analysis on how the Fed did something different during the financial crisis and instead bought mortgage-backed securities as a prime policy tool. Okay, great. So just so you know that it helps, I think, to apply some of this stuff to something that you can see is happening in the real world, and that way you know that some of these things are how they're at least supposed to affect the economy. No, there's not. I mean, just like a little paragraph or a little short answer. So I'm not looking for you to go, do any outside research. So I'll show you the one that I put in your final. And so it's essentially another type of quantitative easing. So it's a similar analysis. You can use how I did it to argue it. Just make sure you apply it to what's happening now and not the mortgage-backed securities. So no, there's no. I'm not going to grade this too critically. I just want you guys to be able to use the current situation and apply the analysis. So no, there's no link. There's no requirement. Just as long as you answer it. Okay. So the very last part, E, it's more for just. I'm not going to grade it that critically. I just want to hopefully get you guys to understand how you can apply the policies to real world situations. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. Okay. So all right. I'll post your final exam in a little bit or soon. But any questions on any of these problems before we do that, or anything else? Okay. So you guys feel good about the final? Do you think it's easier than the midterm too, or not? All right. Well, you have a week to do it, and you can use my. Yeah, so you have a week to do it. I think it's. I don't know. I think it's. I think the hardest question type was the gains from trade, chapter 16. But this. It's. I think you guys have a good understanding of how to do this, so I think you'll be fine. Okay. So let me show you let me post the final in a minute, and then you guys have a week to do it, and until Wednesday to do the homework assignments, and you can email me or whatever if you need questions in addition to my practice problems and videos. Okay, so I'm gonna just give me a second. And I'm gonna post your final to Blackboard. So let me do this while you guys are here. Okay, so I think I posted on Blackboard, so you can go to the Blackboard page and scroll down to the final exam spring 2020 new section. Okay, and once you guys, next week I'll put all my solutions after you guys turn them all in, so the solutions will go right in this section. So the final exam, you can open it up. Okay, so just it's due. So it's due in a week, week 16 by Monday, next Monday, and do the email. And so just when will grades be posted? Let's see if everything will be submitted by next Monday, and so probably by Friday next week. So that was private. Well, someone asked when the grades will be posted, but grades will probably be posted by the 29th, the May 29th, if I get everything done. So probably the Monday finals week. Okay, so just let me just make sure you guys are good with your finals. So the questions are similar. There's 5 questions, and you'll see they're similar to what we just did together. Okay, so there's one on converting real or nominal to real GDP, doing the index like we did, and note that you're going to, in this case, inflate the price. So do the same thing, but the price is going to be inflated. Okay, so you do the economic growth one. There's an example here with you do the growth rates, the per capitas, and the growth rate per capita. Okay, so here you do the graphical analysis with the AS and AD curves and shift the curves around. All right. Okay, so number 4, you do the different types of fiscal policy, government spending, taxes, and then the together effect when you do both of them together, a combined combination of spending and tax cuts. And then number 5, Okay, you'll do the monetary policy. So the first part is the multiplier and the new money creation. And then just note that I added this part E, in response to what's going on right now. Okay, so let me just redo this paragraph so you don't freak out. And then you can just use something similar to what I did in the practice solution. So just so you know how this would affect the economy. And I think you guys have a pretty good idea, but this is something new that just happened pretty much last week. So, part E. Okay, so in response to the economic shutdown caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, the Federal Reserve's new corporate credit facility, which they just launched, took in $305 million worth of something called exchange traded funds on the first day of operation. And so this is according to a press release on a bunch of websites, but I put this one up. I think it's from last Thursday or last Friday. Yeah, so May 15th. This just happened, so it's fun how you can apply the analysis to something that happened like less than a week ago. Okay, so all you have to do is do something similar and explain the cause-effect change from this specific monetary policy that the Fed is doing. And so they're essentially buying these things called exchange-traded funds, which they in the corporate sector, which they've never done before. So it's a specific policy to help out the corporate sector, which needs money and liquidity at a very dire sense. And so explain how the Fed expects this action to boost real GDP in the U.S. economy, and you can view this. It's similar to what we did with the mortgage-backed securities analysis. And so this is another form of quantitative easing because, again, interest rates are super low, and so the Fed has to do something else and try to help the sectors that need it. In this case, lots of corporations and businesses need money now, and they're doing this, and so they're essentially buying these exchange traded funds, which are just a type. It's like a basket of stocks that is traded on the open market, and so you can look up what an exchange rate traded fund is. It's pretty simple, but just try to explain how this specific policy, which is just going to put the Fed is buying an asset, and the corporations or businesses are getting money from the Fed, and they can use that money to, try to give out new lending and hire new employees, etc. So it's essentially just another type of quantitative easing that the Fed is doing right this moment. So you can just put a little paragraph or how you think this is going to affect the economy, and it'll be similar to what the Fed did with the mortgage-backed securities. So I think you guys know what to do here, but let me know if you have any questions about this part. Okay, so questions about the final that you guys have to do? Okay, just make sure you get any homeworks, which are chapters 10, 11, chapters 12 and 13, chapters 14 and chapter 15. So those got to be in by Wednesday, and I'll post the solutions on Thursday morning, so you can see those in case you need them for the final. And let me pull up the syllabus real quick, and then I'll let you guys go. Okay, so I did schedule, I have in the syllabus or the updated schedule. There's one more meeting which is scheduled for next Monday, so I'll keep it. I'll just in case you guys need anything or have any questions, I'll plan on being there on Monday. We're not going to do any new material, so it's optional. It's like office hours. If you want to, stop by and ask a question or anything about your grade or the final or the homework, you're welcome to. But there won't be any new material. So I'll keep the same meeting for the last week during finals, which is Monday, May 25th. And so just in case you guys have any questions, you can find me there. But if not, you guys don't have to. So it's up to you. But let me know if you have any questions about your final or the homework or anything else. And yeah, I think that's it. And thank you guys for a great semester and being flexible. So I think that's it. Yeah. Yeah, question?
I just said thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Sure.